Hi. Hello. I'm so excited. Even in Zoom meetings, it's still so good to see everyone's face. So I'm Jessica Bowser-Akery, and I would like to welcome you to the Masters of Arts Management Conversation Series today, October 23rd, 2020. I'd like to thank the Zoom audience who could be joining us from all over the world. Some of our international students may pop in, even though it's late night for them. Carnegie Mellon University's Master of Arts Management, MAM program is a joint program between the Heinz College of Information Systems and Public Policy and the College of Fine Arts. Before we begin today, I would like to acknowledge that our campus, where we learn, work, and grow, is located on the traditional, ancestral, unceded territory of the Osage. And that southwestern Pennsylvania region, where many of us reside and may be joining this Zoom event from, was home to multiple tribes of indigenous people. The arts and philanthropy in 2020 is the focus of today's conversation. I always trip over philanthropy. The Masters of Arts Management Conversation Series seeks to provide opportunities for alumni from CMU's MAM program to have a conversation with a top leader in their sector or field to benefit our current student cohort and invited guests. Conrhonda Baker, MAM alumni of 2008, is currently both the founder and chief copy editor of the Bessie Saka and the Grants Program Associates at the Howard Gilman Foundation. Conrhonda's passion for performing arts is grounded in her dance background, and her fundraising and government affairs and program development experience includes work with the South Arts, Wolf Trap, and Alvin Ailey Dance Foundation, just to name a few. She will be leading the conversation today with Bahia Ramos, who joined the Wallace Foundation in 2018 as the Director of Arts. The Wallace Foundation fosters improvements in learning and enrichment for disadvantaged children and the vitality of arts for everyone. Ms. Ramos leads the team responsible for the strategy and implementation of the foundation work areas, including building audiences for the arts and promoting arts education for young people. Please use the chat feature throughout to send questions you have to me, the Zoom host. At the end of the conversation, we hope to have time to ask some of these questions. Please help me in welcoming our guests. Conrhonda, the Zoom audience is all yours. Thank you so much for this today.
Oh, you're very welcome, Jessica. I am incredibly honored to have this opportunity to chat with Bahia. And hopefully we will all just leave more enriched and with more joy than we came into this conversation with today. I just want to acknowledge I am Zooming in from rural Northeast Georgia at my parents' house where I grew up. So that is the land of the Creek and the Muskogee tribes on what we call in my family unincorporated Maddoxville. My great-grandfather acquired about 100 acres as a Pullman porter back in the day. So we're trying to figure out how did he get his hands on so much land for basically a subdivision. And then I'll kind of kick it over to Bahia to introduce herself. And before we talk about philanthropy, I'm curious to know, as you introduce yourself, you can let us know if you were a full-time working artist, like what genre would you practice? For me, I'd be a tapper or a flapper if I can go back to the 20s. I would absolutely be in the Cotton Club heyday, kicking it up. How about you?
Oh my gosh, I am such, so dance hands down for me. Really love like the exploration of the body and response to emotion and rhythm. I'm more of like a Debbie Allen and Fame type, like hit the routine, stick it, let's get it, sharpen those movements. If DJing, which I consider to be a really fine art, were a fine art, I would be a DJ instead too.
That's awesome. That's awesome. And Bahia, are you joining us today from New York?
I'm joining you from Brooklyn, New York. Wallace is located in downtown Manhattan. We've been closed since March, and we'll be reopening at some point in 2021. But I've been spending the last 7 months, I don't know, 7 months here in Brooklyn, where I was born and raised. So I've lived in many different cities, or a couple different cities, but I've always come back to Brooklyn, which I believe where the center of New York is for me.
I'm not going to argue with that because I am not a native New Yorker, so I will gladly see that title.
Yes, please give me my street cred where I can get it.
I absolutely will. I know, so we both have grad degrees, right? We've gone through this thing that a lot of our students are going through, the academic courses, the reading days, the tests, the application, the internships and apprenticeships. I'm curious to know, like for you, was there a particular course or project that you worked on that you realize now was vital to how you have approached your career?
Yeah, interestingly enough, with like a background in the arts and in culture, I never purport to be a real numbers person, but there was a moment in my statistics class in grad school that really kind of like reshaped my brain. And I think part of it was about two things. It was around kind of like active listening and translation. So like walking into a space that was really unfamiliar, listening to a language that like I couldn't connect to just because of the way I learn, and having to really use those listening skills and then translate that, what I was hearing, into something that I could like respond to. And there was a moment when, those moments where you enter a new space and you're really struggling and you're trying to figure out what's going on, where something clicked and I repeated it back to my professor and he said, yes, you got it. And I thought, oh, I really have to listen deeply. And I have to take the things that I listen to, and where they need translation for other environments or other ways of learning, I have to continue to do that. And for me, that moment in grad school kind of changed the way that I listen and the way that I interpret and the way I kind of like observe and absorb.
Man, that's so good, because like you didn't leave that saying I'm going to be a statistician, right?
Oh,
like,
no, that wasn't gonna
happen. Yeah, like you're still not working in that field and doing that. But that's so good to show the things that are sometimes the most challenging can actually teach a behavior, and help hone a skill set that then sort of works out in the future. That's awesome. I just want to really like address the moment that we're in for our students, because 2020 is hard, y'all. I don't know. As Jessica mentioned, I'm a graduate of the class of 2009, which we all know was the height of the economic recession when everything came out. And I know what it feels like to graduate into, uncertainty. And this moment feels very similar to that, and not knowing what the job market is going to look like. I can say, thankfully, I was able to find a role with the MAM program support, and actually some federal support for a job that I was able to go into, and really thinking about where I wanted to go. I came back to the Southeast. I moved to Birmingham. I worked in a smaller organization and made those choices to still work in my craft, but scale differently so that I was financially okay. So I'm curious to know, like, Bahia, for you, what was that first job like for you out of grad school? Was the climate crazy too?
Yeah, so I graduated in 2010 from my program, and just coming out of the woods of the craziness. There were 40 people in my cohort, and maybe half of us graduated with a position in hand. And I think while I had the privilege, so part of my program was being in, one of the requirements was about being embedded in a nonprofit for 9 months to kind of learn the ropes as you study. And I had the privilege of being placed at Knight Foundation in Miami for my mentorship, and was offered a position during my mentorship to stay. And I think the biggest thing there was this was Miami, Florida in 2010. My entire life and identity and existence and network was based in New York. And I really had to think about what the trade-offs might be, personally, professionally, financially, to take a position that felt like a dream job at the time, but not a dream life at the time. And it was really difficult. So I really had to, there are lots of trade-offs. Like my life changed, like my life did a full 180 once that decision was made. And there were many sacrifices involved in that, but it was a very difficult time, and not knowing where opportunity was going to happen next, I think places a lot of pressure on someone to really consider, not what's just best for me, but like, where are my values going to take hold here? Am I going to be able to have some freedom in the midst of all this uncertainty and kind of turmoil? Is this a place that's stable? Can I grow here? Will I be challenged? Am I surrounded by people I can learn from? And and those are really big things for me to consider, along with changing my entire environment and walking in as a stranger to a new city.
Yeah, that's so interesting, because I did that essentially in reverse. So I went to Birmingham. At the time, my grandmother was in her hundreds in North Carolina.
Wow.
So I wanted, I was in Pittsburgh. I wanted to be closer to her before she passed. And the climate was crazy. So I'm like, okay, Birmingham is not that far from Georgia. That's easy to get to. I was in Birmingham for 4 years. I was there way longer than I thought I was going to be. But then when I moved to the Northeast, I had those same considerations that you had when you went to Miami, because I think some of the MAMs still say this, like, there's a contingent of people that are never New Yorkers. We're like, we love the arts, but never New York, right?
I can understand that.
And what I realized was that if I wanted to do fundraising, like if I really wanted to do arts fundraising and for dance, I needed to either be in New York or San Francisco.
Yeah.
And San Fran was just like way too far.
Yeah. I was, when I agreed to go to Miami to do during grad school, I agreed because I thought in principle it would be 9 months, and that turned out to be 9 years. And I did not anticipate that by any shred of, like, that never entered my mind that my life would be like that. And I think, like you, I was really interested in how capital flows through systems. So this whole nebulous kind of sector of philanthropy, and how one keeps money in perpetuity, and where does it go, and how do decisions get made. That curiosity kind of allowed me to stay in the space and grow much longer than just saying, oh, I work at a foundation now, I won't leave.
Yeah, so that is an amazing segue to, like, let's talk about foundations for a minute and philanthropy, right? Because grant making institutions sometimes we're looked at as inscrutable but inexhaustible ATMs. It's like, I have this card and I know that if I can figure out how to get access to it, I just keep putting it in and the checks keep coming. And you and I know that's not true. So, every foundation has a mission, just like every nonprofit. There's key goals and priorities for these investments. Like, it's not just that money is free flowing. So I just wanted to know, like, could you talk a little bit about what Wallace's mission is, sort of specifically, to begin with?
Sure. So Wallace was founded by the heads of Reader's Digest. So I don't know if any of you know about the little publication Reader's Digest that used to be kind of like cliff notes for the headlines of the news of the world. So DeWitt and Lila Atchison Wallace founded Wallace Foundation based on their interests, which were education and the arts. And so we do work in 3 areas: in learning and enrichment, which is around out of school time, in education leadership, which is around principals and trainings of superintendents and systems of schools, and then the arts. And Lila's governing principle around the arts was that the arts belong to everyone. And it was their mission to kind of like spread the gospel of the arts to everyone and help everyone feel like the arts were a part of their daily lives. And that gets translated in the foundation in 2 ways. One is through arts education, which ties into our other program areas, where we focus on partnerships that give access to children in give arts access to children in communities all over the country right now through Boys and Girls Club of America. And then secondly, in the institutional arts. And Wallace has really kind of like evolved and refined its tools and research over time, to, you know, go from community arts to thinking about how people relate to the arts, which developed a lot of work around audiences. And now we are actually coming a little back around to community, but thinking about what's the role of, what is the purpose of community to an arts institution, and how do we think about that? And underneath all of the work that we do is a really principled approach to creating credible knowledge and research for other institutions and sectors to use, because we believe that if you can put good knowledge out into the sector, people can help kind of develop their tools and skills over time, and you can build better institutions and leaders through that. So that's our work in a nutshell. And like Conrhonda said, I'm responsible for kind of the arts ed and the institutional arts investments for the foundation.
That's awesome, because it's so different from what we do at the Howard Gilman Foundation, right? So you have a national scope, and my foundation has a hyper local scope. So we're not looking at funding research or helping. We don't even have the infrastructure within our team to actually do the research ourselves. We're really looking at a specific geographic area and saying, you know, what does the professional performing arts look like in this area, and how can we infuse capital and support into making sure that people who have decided they want the performing arts as a career can actually do that. Like, that's the core of what we're doing. And we're not a family foundation, which is really confusing to people because we're named after Howard Gilman,
right,
who was known for literally just being a philanthropist. He had private wealth, and he would find an artist he liked and he would support them in the traditional older sense of philanthropy. And a lot of people don't know Mr. Gilman was Mikhail Baryshnikov's sponsor when he defected from Russia. So the opera house at BAM, the Brooklyn Academy of Music, is the Howard Gilman Opera House, and a lot of people don't like put that together, that like Mr. Gilman was just like, here, build it. So we try to keep some of that philosophy, but that is incredibly different missions, and it's so important as fundraisers to like get into that and understand those differences of the two institutions.
I mean, I think when you've met one foundation, you've met one foundation. And part of this translation skill, even I didn't really know about Knight Foundation before I got there, and had to learn a lot about the Knight brothers and their roots in journalism, and that they really did care about the arts in their communities. But a lot of the work is around that translation that I mentioned earlier. You know, you see a foundation, you think maybe the values and the way they talk about the work aligns. Like, how do you find a way to marry what you're trying to achieve or the work you want to do with the language of that space, in a way that creates value for the communities and the institutions and people that you're trying to serve?
Yeah, and a lot of that is literally based on relationships. I like to say foundation officers and institutional giving professionals are people with paperwork. So if you approach us like individual, approach us like a major donor, but then understand there's some paperwork that's going to come, later. So I'm curious, for you across your career, like what has it looked like to be in relationship with grantees? How do you maybe sort of protect that personal and professional space? Because we know there's an inherent power dynamic too that we're always mindful of.
Yeah, I mean, one is that I'm very transparent about that. Two, it's interesting because especially in the arts, as a person who's passionate about the arts and attends the arts, that can sense like unintended signals that, there's shows and things that I like to see. And like, I have friends in the industry, it's hard not to show up and support. But no, when I'm doing that on behalf of myself or on behalf of Wallace, I like just my principle is around transparency, knowing that when people have questions, that I can be as transparent as possible, and that, and in effect, it's not their burden to translate their work into what I need, but like for me to help them translate their work into what I need. And I learned a lot about that at Night, because Night was a wide open portal that just said anybody from a practicing artist to a long established arts institution, come right in, tell us your idea, and we'll see if we can find a way to fund it. And I think it's easier to kind of start off that way and go to a place like Wallace that is very invitation only. We kind of see the context, we develop RFPs, and we have a different process, so that I think my relationship is around how do I understand the context? What value do I bring inside to Wallace to help educate my peers and expose my peers to what's going on outside? And in effect, like practicing artists, institutions, all of those conversations help feed that knowledge. And I hope that by them entrusting me with it, they know that it's so that I can like bring it back in support of what they're trying to do and find a way to make something work. But that's really just been about transparency, openness, curiosity, and being responsive, and not taking a month to say something, to say to say hello to somebody, and really trying to really absorb and attend and show up in spaces that I know are important.
Yeah. That's so awesome. And I'm curious to know, because for me, I have that same, it's New York City. I know lots of people, like I have friends that want to show up, and I'm like, no, I'm here as a free agent.
Right.
Right. So for
Yes.
me, like that's been in this shift from fundraiser to funder, which I don't see as two sides of a coin. I love to show my coaster here. So like, this is not fundraiser. Like actually it's fundraiser, artist. Like all I'm doing is shifting my seat, and the perspective is different, but it's all connected. That's been a pivot that I've had to make, and a shift in my philosophy and grant making practice to be explicit, be like free agent. Are there any things like that you've noticed over your tenure in philanthropy where you've seen a pivot at an organization, how they?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. In my last kind of institutional arts job was as government. Like we have this in common, government affairs director, and working on capital projects and having to like lobby for to public officials around the importance of art. And I in a way kind of have to like that, bringing that philosophy of like being the lobbyist, being the advocate for the arts, to my institution, to make sure like our investments are sound, are responsive, are part of moving the sector forward. There's some really intentional thinking about that is not just about I like this thing is cool and I want to give it money. And so I think that's a pivot, that's kind of a growth that has really happened and been retooled over and over. I mean, it even changes while I'm in an institution over the years.
Yeah, and because it's all like we are still in relationship with our staff and our teammates. I know a pivot for me is like in this moment where I have proximity to different ethnic communities. And so I'm doing translating work in a way that I would not normally, because, I know I have that privilege of being able to reduce harm in some cases. And not put the burden on the grantee to help us educate ourselves.
Right. I mean, I think there's a specific moment. I mean, we can say that there are not a lot of people of color working in philanthropy, and then drill it down into the arts, right? And then think about what's happening in the arts in this moment, and where do our voices have influence? Where do they provide care? Where do they provide agency? Where do they prevent harm? And then how do we care for ourselves and our families and our communities in that moment, right? And there, I have to be very, I mean, I'm I have to be very open with my peers and with my team about that, right? And my presence in this and what it means, but also create some boundaries around that, and have some self-care moments around that, because the emotional investment is deep, and it requires a lot of energy and time and focus.
Yeah, I thank you for I'm gonna veer off script a little bit because I'm
Okay,
just
sorry.
curious,
Yeah.
personally curious. Yeah, I mean, I think that is really key to sort of understand that, particularly in this moment when there's a hyper focus on Black, Latinx, Asian, Indigenous,
Mhm.
Arab serving or led organizations, that those are organizations that are homogenous within that group. And I'm going to speak to a little bit like the grantee relationship and
Mhm.
how some of those organizations might not understand what it's like for a person like you and I to work in a primarily white institution.
Mhm. Mhm.
So there's a level of grace that
Mhm.
we
Mhm.
are working to engender, to be like, listen, you at least get to be with your people all
Mhm.
day.
Mhm. Mhm.
That for me, like, then I have to have some self-care sort of around that. So there's a beautiful moment that's sort of happening where I see the grace being delivered to us, and then be like, okay, you were working and you
Yeah.
were, oh, you're okay. Like I get here. Here's the notes from the field. Here's how I can resource you to move forward.
Right. And
That
think
was
about
my,
just being seen and being heard and understanding, kind of like on a very primary level, like, oh, okay, what does it mean to feel seen and feel heard? How do I reflect that back? And then try to like relay it to people for whom that might not be something that needs to be considered.
yeah. So my question to you is, what does self-care look like?
And these days, so going outside,
Mm.
open space, which is something, again, I was like, open space, whatever. But like now I'm like, open space is any green space, anywhere to walking these streets, moving my body, talking to my friends, still feeling like I'm connected to a community, and baking.
Are you doing sourdough?
I am not going to sourdough. No. Stopped at pound cake.
Hey.
I'm just trying. That's where it ends. But like pound cake, biscuits, like I'm trying like different scones, breakfast, I don't know, pastries, things like that. But and then it's also just stillness, moments of quiet, going inside, that I really need that in this time as well. Like, what are the things that fortify my mind, my body? That's what it looks like right now until the world opens back up again.
I love it. Thank you for sharing. I am in rural Georgia and I still have not had a piece of pound cake. Which,
really? So I have to
right?
say, yeah, that's crazy. I used to go to Columbus and Macon and Milledgeville a lot when I worked at night. And Columbus, Georgia was one of my favorite places to go. I don't know if you're near there, but I really enjoyed it.
I'm about 2.5.
Okay.
I'm on the other side of the state.
Okay.
So
Okay.
there's northeast corner, but I'm
like
literally
in the
halfway
south
between Clemson and UGA.
Oh, okay. So, but to be south and not have pound cake, that seems odd to me.
Because my mom doesn't bake.
Oh. I have to send you my friend's recipe then.
Please. I was just like, that's the one thing. I'm literally drinking sweet tea right now.
Okay.
So, and then I was like, oh, pound cake. Complete and total aside. Thank you for indulging me and reminding me of the things I need to get before I leave the state. So back to the sort of topic at hand, I would say even the communication between the Gilman Foundation and Wallace and other local, like Ford and Mellon and Duke, like y'all are the big four. but even hyper locally, I feel like this moment, because of the crisis, is very different in the way that philanthropic institutions are relating to each other. And you've been in this space way longer than I have. Would you say that there's more communication between organizations beside like, hey, here's somebody that I think might fit?
Yes. So I think one, happily so, there's because everything has moved on to Zoom, and there are less opportunities for us to casually run into each other, or have a meeting about something. We're finding ways, and we're opening up our processes and conversations around the moment. Part of that is because, you know, it's time, and we need to be more responsive as an industry. Another part, I think, is that philanthropy is going through its own reckoning as well, right? Here are a number of institutions sitting on billions and billions of dollars who are investing anywhere between 5 and 7% of those dollars, when that's a choice, right? Why, you know, society's kind of turning around and saying, well, what's your purpose? Why are you here? And what are you doing? And how are you making those decisions? And I think internally staff are also saying, you know, I think we need to actually be more responsive and be more agile, and really find answers to these questions in a way that satisfy the public, and really actually dig into our purpose more actively than kind of saying we believe these things and rest on our let's rest on our laurels every year, after the investments are made. And so I've really enjoyed our conversations as officers, as associates, as people in the field, that we've been coming together every month and having. I like that we're beginning to share our processes and ways of decision making with each other. My ultimate goal would be to have a real shared language between shops around the work that we're doing, although that seems relatively impossible. But I like the camaraderie, and I like that I can call upon colleagues in different spaces and get real answers from them. And I can bring those answers back, and they help influence the decisions we're making, right? I no longer feel like people's moves aren't influencing our own decisions. Like, in the context, what are we doing? And are we doing things that really bring about change and are about institutions that need to be cared for in this moment, and not just in this moment, but for the future? And what are the ways that we reckon with all the underinvestment, and the ways that we turned our backs on places and institutions and organizations that have been doing the work for so long and have built so many like good assets and practices for the sector that have gone under acknowledged and under researched and under resourced. So I'm buoyed by those conversations, and I hope that we continue to be pushed as a sector to do more to rectify those wrongs.
Yeah, that's so great, because I think about how Wallace is positioned as a national funder and what that means when a big organization invests hyper locally, and what that relationship looks like. And for many people who are going in, or they're going into their internship and their apprentices, and the assignment is, here, go prospect some people, right? Like, starting with the Wallace might not be the best idea, but looking at, okay, if you have been there, who were the funding partners that you were in relationship with that are hyper local, that are really committed to that area? And they may be smaller. That's right. That actually family foundations, you know, too. So the stronger our communication is, and the more public we are about where we're aligned, particularly in hyper local community, that just seems like it has benefit all around.
Yeah, I have to make a plug for so one of my first kind of grant maker exposures was with the New York Women's Foundation, which is based here and raises money for organizations that benefit women and girls in New York City. And I was on an advisory committee, and here I was, just a person working in an arts institution that with another group of women got sent out to talk to and learn about prospective organizations. So my first touch of grant making was, you go out and you learn and you listen and you respond and make the decision. my first real job at night was with community foundations. And that's where we got really local, and you learned about who are the donors, the local donors, and that care about different parts of this community and care about those places, like how communities thrive. And then how do we elevate those voices and investments in a way that builds kind of unity? So for me, it's all about community foundations, family foundations, hyper-local foundations that have a voice and a range of activism in some ways that institutional philanthropy can't have, or does not have, that really move the needle. I really believe all change is local, and if you really go local with philanthropy, I think you find some really good organizations that are doing the kind of grassroots mobilization and move at the speed of reality versus the speed of foundation that I think energize you.
Man, I feel like I need you to say that again for the folks in the back, like the move at the speed of community and not
reality. She said reality. Yes, I heard her. Reality. I almost wrote it down.
Right? Like, like say that again for the folks in the back, because that's key.
There are actual grant making institutions that move at the speed of reality and not at the speed of foundation. And I think, we put lots of money out into the market, but you will find on average it takes 6 months to a year for that money to be deployed once the decision has been made. And I'm being generous with 6 months. And so oftentimes, and I've experienced this with team members, you come in and foundations are going to change the world, and you see something good and you're like, here it is. Oh my God, we're saying like, we're going to get to a yes. And we say yes. And then the money has to travel through the pipeline and the due diligence and the blah and the and the press release and the and then the next thing you know, the idea that was created in January is not being funded until December. And it can be a little heartbreaking to say, like, why can't we? And it's just the bureaucracy of it all that requires a lot of patience, and it has, and it has many steps. This, Conrhonda, and is not always going to respond to the current moment in the way that people, both internally and externally, want it to. And while I think we're getting a little better, at least with the press release, or at least getting the funds together and doing a little due diligence before we announce that the thing is happening, so that money, it feels a little faster, we don't move, generally speaking, at the speed of need.
Yeah, so I'm going to kick it over to Jessica in 1 second, if you will indulge me, because I think, again, I'm moving off script. I think there's a question here, and this will be our last one before we open it up. But can you unpack what you mean when you say due diligence? Because I think
I'm like, aren't you better at this?
I think that term means different things for different foundations.
Okay, very true. Mm-hmm.
And I'm not sure, in the practice of teaching fundraising, there is, of course, like know the foundation, do your research, prospect, like everything up to the proposal, like getting it to the person, and then the grant maker has it, and they're going to do something that hopefully results in a check.
Sure.
And what I'm saying is that something is the due diligence.
Right, exactly.
So demystifying, like, what is it that we do once we get an application?
Right. So you get an application. If you're on it, let's say you are on a team, and decisions are made not just by one person. And so you speak with your team. You have to make sure the proposal, whatever is being proposed, is aligned with the strategic kind of vision that you have for that program area within your team. And this is more of like a night process, because it's easier to describe a night process. And so you take that body of work, you've now said, you've all agreed to it internally for your team. You then take that body of work, whether it's a combination of things or a solitary thing, to the broader foundation and say, okay, in the work that comprises the arts at X Foundation, we'd like to do this. And it will cost X amount of dollars, either in our budget, or if you don't have a budget, this is what it's going to cost. And all that gets negotiated. And sometimes you're going back to the grantee and saying, can we talk about this number or talk about this program objective? Then you kick it over into finance and grants admin, who will then do due diligence. And for us, like, so now this is me as like the program person saying, I know it's about checking 501c3 status, kind of budgets, making sure the numbers are right, making sure that the relationship, like the ratio of funding to budget size, jives with the kind of decision that the fund, like the foundation has made around, I don't want to be more than 20% of somebody's operating budget.
Negative net assets.
Negative net assets, exactly.
Do they have a board that has all family members on it? How often is
Correct.
the board meeting?
Right.
All of the things that the Better Business Bureau like says
Right.
makes a good charity.
So you enter like a period of heavy scrutiny, right? And then once that gets approved, then, you say, okay, now you have a viable, it meets our checks and balances, it meets the program need and desire. We then have to take this body of work to our board. And the board will then let us know if it's okay to then fund these organizations. It usually on lower thresholds, in some places at 250 and under, the president can make the choice to fund the thing. But at most places at 250 and above, the board of the foundation has to make the ultimate, the final decision about funding an idea or organization. It gets, let's say you go in, I present to the board on behalf of this body of work and get asked questions and have to answer questions. Sometimes if there are questions I can't answer, I go back to the grantee. Most of the times, I can answer the questions. And then it goes in and gets processed as a grant in our internal system. And you can talk about things like, Flux, or what we use GMS 360, but it goes into a now internal kind of mechanic system to be processed as a grant. And that's when all the banking information comes into play. So, it really is. And boards meet quarterly. So if you don't get, like, if you get a grant, a proposal, let's say you get a full application in by, you say, oh, I'm going to get it in by early June, you won't make the June board meeting because our board papers already went out in May. And so it's one of these things about knowing these these relationships that you build, like you almost have to know some of the internal working systems of the foundation itself, not just the fund program side, but the processing side, to know when it's a good time to get all the ducks in a row and know when you need to have some patience around the next time your idea will be decided upon by the people there.
Yeah, I know that is so good and was like the best nutshell ever, and I love it. And it's one of the things that I know is a pain point for people when they think about NEA funding.
Yeah,
because NEA funding is literally almost a year in advance, and it forces an organization to forecast very far out. But I was always like, as a new organization working in, as a new fundraiser coming in, I was like, we're going to start with government. Because if I can get you in that process of thinking, forecasting a year out, then once I get in relationship with our funding partners and I can understand what their cycle is, I've already got my artist in a space of already, not saying the need is right now, yes, but because there's so much work that happens behind the scenes, it really positions a development officer really well to like build that skill with government. Right. And then you're able to apply it to private foundations. And this is why I say that foundation institutional giving is people with paperwork.
Yeah, it is.
because essentially, and I'll just share what I realized, and this is why I say it's not two sides. What I realized is when I left fundraising and came to this job, I had the same job. And I was like, I thought I was done advocating for projects. I thought I was done like pitching cases and doing case statements. And I was like, all I did was jump into more paperwork.
Yeah, we are advocates. Yeah. I really do see we still play an advocacy role for institutions within our organizations.
Yeah. And I was like, our institution is,
and artists, I want to say institutions, artists, organizations, whatever form you might take on behalf of the arts. I don't want to just limit myself.
Thank you for being inclusive. That's awesome. Yeah. Because our organization at Gilman, we're very different in that we will overlook paperwork that is a little wonky because we're going to have the conversation. So there's a sort of check and balance in there where it's like, okay, this paperwork you're asking, what are you asking for? Like, hold on, let's meet. Because some of we're hyper local and the organizations we're working with, like we just know that a lot of them don't have fundraising staff.
Right.
Like they just don't. So we're like, we don't want to perpetuate that cycle of dog and pony show and like creating the here's how you do this. But I'll kick it over to Jessica and see if there's any questions that have come in.
Well, sure. And everyone should send, can you hear me? Am I on? Okay. And everyone should send me questions in the chat or raise their hand. I know we have one person with their hand raised. I wanted to open with a question. By the way, the detail of this is really fantastic. I've been really loving hearing about the bureaucracy, as I often am at a higher education place, also tied in that same waters. So I empathize. I have a question that, I don't know, you can both take this one maybe. So we have a 2-year program. We have a required summer internship where students go out and work, for an entire summer. They also work a lot many students choose to have internships and apprenticeships during their school year for maybe 15, 20 hours a week. A lot of those are in development offices, not so much in philanthropy. It's very tough. I've pitched internships to philanthropy offices many times, and I'm ready to talk to both of you too. Always come to us if you're looking for interns, but they go out and there's sort of like the new filing, if you will. So, like the interns used to be like the filing. So I think there's 2 things that are the new filing, and I'd like to hear your comment on the second one. So the really ugly new filing is all I did was run their social media, so they're 22-year-olds. So they're just like sat and said like, hey, can you figure out our social media maybe? Okay. So that's like the new filing. But the second new filing that comes a lot from small to mid-sized nonprofits, in my opinion, is a student will come back and say, they wanted me to do grant research. All they wanted me to do all summer was grant research. And so I think that there's a lot of mixed results from that. We're still an education program, and sometimes that intern has just been told, go research grants. And sometimes maybe I think they're given a little bit more information, like here's the types of things we're doing, here's our boilerplate, here's our this, here's our that. But if you could like take the time machine back with the knowledge you have now and say you're going to take your first internship at a dance company or an art company or a museum, a performing art organization in general, and the person said to you, well, you're going to do these 5 teams for me, but your task for the whole year is going to be to, find us a new place to research, find us foundations to write grants for. Could either of you maybe speak on maybe like where to start or how to think about it? Or maybe, I don't want to say that interns should push back to their supervisors, but I think that sometimes here's where they think like, well, I'm just supposed to know how to go and find places to apply for money, but no one's taught me how to do that. So I'd love to hear, with your knowledge now, what your opinion might be on that.
I can absolutely take that, because like that legit happened to me at Dance Alloy, which is merged with Kelly Strayhorn. So, I came out in my apprenticeship and was like, here, working with the managing director, and I was like, yes, we're doing fundraising. We feel okay about our individual giving, but we really want to focus on foundations. And I had an adjunct professor, thankfully, at that time, who really sort of ingrained in us that it's about the entire fundraising pie, and that you should never go in with a laser focus on one area of the donor map without a reason. So I was just like, hey, okay, great. I think I can do this. However, can we talk about your strategic plan? Can you talk to me about your development plan? Like, can you help me understand what the initiatives are going forward so that I can really focus and possibly bring you the best prospects, right? Like, just getting super curious about it and being like somewhat confused. And be like, okay, before I do this, like, I want to be sure that we're on the same page. And what that highlighted was that there wasn't a development plan. It literally was just the managing director being like, oh, well, we know people that we know and they give us money and we do pretty cool special events, but we don't feel like our institutional is that great because no one's focused on it. Like, no one tried. And I was just like, okay, so I'm in this really cool program right now. And like, how about I build a development plan first? Like, how about we work on actually figuring out, is this an institution whose work fits best with institutional partners? And if anyone knows Dance Alloy back in the day, that was in your face dance theater, not Pittsburgh institutional like fodder at all. And so what we ended up doing was doing some stuff around government and like shoring up the low-hanging fruit in that area, but really ramping up the annual campaign and making their special event gala even bigger, and like all of these places for the people who actually love them to have an opportunity to do good with their time, talent, and money, and so that like legit happened. And it was really saying, okay, well, if you want me to go down this tactic, help me understand the strategy and the objective for it. And using those negotiation skills, which I took negotiations class, did not do well, but learned so much that helped, broaden that. But yeah, how about you?
Yeah, I mean, I think the integration point is key to that. I also think about how like a sense of like how networks play into this. So if I'm at a dance organization and I'm told go find us funders, one of the first questions I might ask is like, okay, well, who, like, is there anyone like us? Like, what does the landscape of my kind of organization look like? And who's putting money into those spaces? Like, because that might be like low hanging fruit. So kind of poke around in the networks and say, okay, I see these 10 funders circling around these places. I'll go there first to see what kinds of programs and things they're investing in, or things that might be artist-centered versus institution-centered, and thinking about it that way. But yeah, I agree with everything that you said. And I think integration is key. And then just a knowledge of like that organization in the marketplace, right? What does the marketplace of dance funding or, visual arts funding or artist-centered funding actually look like? And how do you tap into any of the materials or websites or research that may be available in those spaces?
Great. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I will give some of those answers back whenever the students call me over the summer. Michelle, you've had your hand up for a little while. We'd love to hear your question.
Cool. Thank you to you both for being here and speaking with us and sharing your insights and experiences. You spoke about forecasting when applying for grants. You have to prepare for the future and ask for funding years in advance, which is something that I experienced trouble with this summer, especially asking for funding for next year when with COVID, who knows if those programs will even exist. So from the foundation side, how much wiggle room do you have considering the current circumstances? Do you expect us to have robust plans for alternative, backups?
I'll say that we at Wallace, although most of our grant making for this year had been deployed, like had been out already, we went straight into GOS, we just kind of dropped the idea of programmatic funding for 2020 and said if anyone came to us who had an endowment, who had program funds or a project that they needed to do for this year, we said it could basically roll into general operating support, and we got rid of the programmatic restrictions around our dollars for this year. And in the case of endowments for the next 2 to 3 years, given all the contraction and kind of all the contraction that's happening, and a sense of knowing that it's almost impossible to try to program even for 2021 right now. And we didn't want our dollars being forced to do something that wouldn't be successful for an organization. So it's always good to ask if you have funding established already, can this just be GOS? But also I would say we're not planning to do any really specific programmatic funding in the early part of 2021, with the knowledge that it's not just to do that.
Yeah, I would say, a lot of what I'm seeing from our peers is that business as usual isn't going to work.
Mm-hmm.
So the actual questions on an application that we would normally ask, you literally physically cannot even answer them. Mm-hmm. So that's the internal work that is happening. And so, like I know at Gilman, we have an open policy. We normally do not do invitation only. We're like, everyone can submit an LOI. We shut that down for this year. We're like, no new LOIs, because as a hyper local foundation, we pivoted to making sure that our current grantee roster is somewhat sustainable,
Mm-hmm.
in trying to buoy them as
Mm-hmm.
much as we
Mm-hmm.
can,
Mm-hmm.
while we say, oh, okay, we need to make this easier. So we normally have 3 cycles, cycle 2 and cycle 3. We actually stripped our application to 1 question. And it was, how is COVID-19 impacting your business?
Mm-hmm.
And it was, we don't care about reports. Like, no, what is happening and what do you need right now? So that was our application for 2021 for current grantees. We're going to expand it a little bit more. We're going to go back to some of those bigger questions. And then we won't start looking at new applicants until April.
Mm-hmm.
But we are way ahead of a lot of our peers in having even an idea of a plan of what we're shifting and what we're changing.
Mm-hmm.
But that is because we are hyper local, and we know, like, we have a commitment to this area, which allows us flexibility. And our board has agreed to rolling board meetings. So on a weekly, almost a bi-weekly basis, we have an idea, we send it out, they're having conversations via email, and then they're willing to say, yes, you can. And all of our grants are board approved, because we're smaller. So everything goes through them. So we're really doing the work to do all of that due diligence and all that financial processing up front, so that the board really feels like if it's gotten to them, then they feel comfortable, moving forward with a recommendation at that point. But again, like that's the difference of being really focused on a community, and us particularly being in New York City, which is hemorrhaging right now. Jessica, what else is on deck? Anybody else?
Yeah, our next question is going to come from Justin, who has his hand up, and then I'm going to take a couple from the chat that have been coming in as well. So Justin, you're up.
Hi, thank you again so much for what's been a really amazing discussion. My question is about impact. Primarily, when organizations collect information about the impact of their projects, we should be doing it for ourselves, but we do it mostly for our funders, trying to showcase what we've done with those resources. My question is, how do you find to be the best ways to measure impact, especially as funding changes from being becoming more community-centric and artist-centric?
I know for Wallace, we've been changing our language around impact over the last year. While we are really, a lot of our research deals with data, and so we can be very data driven. what we found is that this notion of like community orientation and impact on community is vitally important to an organization's sustainability, and our own understanding and language around that actually has to be softer. So it's kind of like tech moving into how do you talk about soft skills, right? And I think we're trying to develop fluency for the soft skills. And so things can come in the form of a case, like a case study, an anecdote. Things can come as a like, we talk about like talking directly to audience or your stakeholders and hearing from them directly around the kind of impact on them emotionally, community-wise. And then this like, how do you share the understanding of what your place in community means? And I think that we're paying attention to that way more than saying, because we know the data, right? Audiences aren't like, first ticket buyers we're retaining like 10 to 20% over. So no one's gonna say like, looking at the numbers anymore, the numbers are fairly universal right now. So there's nothing in the data that's going to stand out. It's really going to be about how do you reflect your understanding of your place in community and your orientation towards community back to funders. Because I think that's what we're starting to come to grips with about talking and in conversation around impact about. But I know that we're trying to develop a fluency for it internally right now.
Yeah, and our impact is, this is so great because you're literally getting like bookends.
Yeah.
Our impact measurement is like so not data driven, because the way that we want to be in relationship with grantees is often we go to performances. Like what we're funding is the work, you know, so we're funding a commission, we're funding general operating support for a company, you know, we're funding different things at different music venues or performing houses. So for us, impact is assessed a lot by us being in the audience and us seeing you successfully do what you said you wanted to do and what you wanted to put on stage. Or, you know, if it's an outdoor concert in the park, like I'm going and I'm hearing jazz in the park and I'm looking at the people around and like we're having a shared experience, which does not exist right now. So for us, like, we're like, how do we even begin to assess impact of things that are happening in the digital space when you're so reliant on face-to-face relationships and experience, which like literally doesn't exist. And so we don't have a report. Like the report is part of the next year's renewal application. It's a question. It's like, what did you do? Like what went well, what didn't? Yeah.
Can I say one more thing? So there's a report called Culture Track that talks about kind of like the people's response to the arts or engagement with the arts. And we commissioned a version of Culture Track for COVID and kind of got responses from that. And it's really interesting. They work with 650 organizations and they interviewed over like 120,000 people or something. But it's but it says like these digital spaces are becoming more diverse in the age of COVID. And so I think like the more we can impart this kind of like these broad understandings onto foundations and organizations alike and think about, okay, if I know generally this is happening, I don't need to ask you what your numbers were for June versus August, right? What I want to ask you is like, how are you responding to this moment? Or have you given yourself space to like have the scenario in mind as you plan for the future? And that's the shift. I think that's different for us.
Thank you. Great question. Thank you. Great answers. David, you sent in a question and we touched on it a little bit, but would you share your question with our conversationalists?
I'd be glad to. And kudos to our conversationalists, as you say, have been very interesting. And I also appreciated the Justin's question about evaluation and impact. Maybe I'll reach out to you and share a few ideas offline here, but I'll just ask my question that I wrote out. In what ways have your foundations assessed and revised your policies and practices in light of emerging racial equity issues. Have your expectations and requirements of applicants and grantees changed? Small little question.
But yeah, I'm happy to answer that first. And
Okay.
David, I'm gonna be really humble, open, and transparent right now, and my answer is not gonna be satisfying. That's to be determined. Where that is something that is actively in conversation. So I can't give you a finite answer there at all. I wish I could. Ask me in maybe 6 months to a year, and we'll have, you know, definites there. But I can confirm that it is a conversation that is actively in process.
Yeah, we're in the actively in process boat too, which is I would say a huge shift in that Wallace tended to look at large kind of mainstream, predominantly white institutions as serving the most people, and really has thought about what the implications of that means within the broader arts sector. I think we're developing a language and processes around equity and determining what that actually means and how it's defined internally, and trying to understand how we develop relationships in spaces where we did not have them, and for which the work is new. And so we are in a stay tuned kind of place too, but what I do know, what I have comfort for, and I think Conrhonda shares this internally with Gilman as well, is that there's a real focus and attention and care given to that conversation, and an openness and appetite for learning, and then understanding that no one person is the expert voice in that, and so we're hoping to take the steps to develop organizational principles and practices around that, that are embedded and not just led by a couple of voices.
Yeah, and if I can layer onto that, I think what's important and what why there is so much care and due diligence, if I may use that word, in this area is because there's a really keen awareness of internal versus external, and a deep commitment to addressing both simultaneously. And that is challenging. And that goes back to, you know, what Bahia and I said, like, when you look at where philanthropic dollars have gone, I think the percentage is like 8% in the Black community. 8% of all philanthropic dollars have gone into Black serving and Black led organizations. Okay, now let's slice that out for the arts, right? And so that's the question of like, well, what is that number really? And then that's external. But what does it look like? Who are we being? Who are we as philanthropists being? And I'll actually quote something, a person from a recent session that occurred in New York City, was indigenous Filipino artist said, "This moment is the acid test for philanthropy's sincerity." And I was like, whoa, say that again. This moment is the acid test for philanthropy's sincerity. And it doesn't mean that it has to all be external. There have to be internal shifts too. Because of this, how do we get in right relationship with communities that we haven't, that we've actively disinvested? That means the people have to approach differently. The systems have to be different. The applications have to be, everything has to shift. And so it's a work in progress, right? For sure.
Yeah, I'll had the pleasure working in Pittsburgh here for a few years, and we did a major study on racial equity and arts funding, often in collaboration with MAM interns, which was a great asset to do that. So maybe I'll share that along. It's not the be all and end all, but it does kind of get into those internal, external issues you were raising, and you know what the public face is, but also then what inside policies and procedures and assumptions, et cetera, that need to reflect on. So maybe I'll reach out accordingly. But
Yeah.
thanks for your answers.
Yeah, thank you.
All right, we are really at the end. Actually, we're at 1:15. There's one person that's had his hand up for a very long time, though. So I'm going, if we can all maybe stick around for just maybe 2 or 3 more minutes. Riley, would you go ahead and ask the last question? If anyone does need to leave, I completely understand, and we are recording this. I don't want to keep our speakers too long, though. So Riley, ask your question. We'll let them answer, and then I'm really going to say thank you to everybody right now. I'm so grateful for you coming here today. I can't express how wonderful this experience was with hearing both of you talk. Riley, go ahead.
Can you hear me? I've been having issues with
Yes.
my mic. Yes.
Yes.
Okay, great. So I've recently been doing research on community-centric fundraising, which is the recently alternative proposal to donor-centric. And that is more focused on, the organization, individual, giving sector. But a big tenet of it is sharing, on the organizational level, sharing your donors with other organizations that may or may not be better suited to meet the kind of impact that they're trying to make. And that's something that, foundations have been doing kind of in reverse, right? By sharing by sharing organizations with other foundations, saying that they might be better matches. And so I'm wondering, there are kind of 2 parts to that whole setup. One is, what are you most excited? This one's kind of more vague. What are you most excited to change in the entire kind of like development fundraising sector in this moment in time? But then also, what do you think individual giving can learn from institutional giving and vice versa?
Not a quick one for the last
I know.
but but no, I mean, these are the conversations that you're getting the luxury to have in class right now. I think that sometimes challenges make things hard for the students, but I do think that challenges bring up these kind of things. I'm just trying to vamp for both of you.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm most excited about changing our processes and assumptions to meet the voice and the voices and the kind of like structures, the new structures of arts organizations. So, a lot of times we say, I have our just what Conrhonda's experience, we have our process, and our process is our process, and it's been our process in perpetuity. And there's this question of like, why does it have to be our process? This is so arbitrary. And clearly we're not getting the kinds of organizations we want to work with through this process. So can't we dismantle this process and make it more responsive to the kinds of communities and organizations we'd like to be in partnership with? So I'm most excited about breaking that all down and rebuilding it in a responsive way. And that's not just programmatic, it's about the research and how our research agendas get constructed and how they move forward into the market. Individual donors, I guess, take their signals from philanthropy, right? And I'm interested, I mean, I'm curious about whether this movement of traditional philanthropy into BIPOC spaces shines a light or becomes some sort of catalyst for the individual donor to pay more attention to the full ecosystem of arts organizations inside and outside of their communities, right? But like how they respond to that notion and like question their own assumptions about where their dollars go and who they want to support in community. So yeah, I think those are my short answers to your questions.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'll just add in, and thank you, Bahia, for going first, because I've been able to distill my answers down. I am so excited about the conversation around aesthetics nationally, right? And the level of rigor and understanding and academic emphasis that is being placed on non-Western European based art forms and high art, right? And so when you think about the traditional arts ecosystem, the amount of time that is spent like actually learning that art form, and then you work in a place and you fund it or whatever, but like there's a lot of education around like the canon, right? And so
completely.
The opportunity for the canon to be broadened, to me is like so critical. Because if you start teaching West African dance to like kids as part of their ballet curriculum, that has a ripple effect. That will shift shift everything, right? So
Yeah.
that's the thing that I'm like, yes.
I'm
listen,
also, yeah. I have to add
Aesthetics.
also aesthetics and like organizational structures, and the idea that like
Mm.
you don't have to be a 501c3 to be an arts organization, and
collective, fiscally
can those
sponsored,
collectives, yes, and those like mutual benefits, like all of that stuff, and that we as philanthropy have to find a way to respond to ways to resource those places, rather than you trying to wedge into traditional structures that aren't meeting the needs of your community or your art form or your artist or your organization. So I'm really excited about what forms come up and how those models become best practices and how those then proliferate into the sector.
Yeah. In regards to individuals, I would love for more institutional philanthropy to really lean into the notion of like individual donors, like GOS. Most individual donors are like, here's annual support. We just want you to be you. Like that generosity of support for the organization as it exists as a whole, and less project budgets, like more of that. To me, I think it's a learning there. So little nugget.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. This has been a true, I think that one of the things that COVID has hurt the most in our whole world is joy and getting to be joyous and get to have, but this conversation has brought me a lot of joy today, seeing the faces in the room. We have many alum, we have lots of students. So I'm trying to find joy everywhere I can because it just feels like it's been sucked out. So today brought me a lot of joy. Thank you both so very, very much.
Thank you. This is great. Thank you for having me in your space, and thank you for your questions and curiosity and just willingness to show up and ask and listen. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you. And I will stay here in case any student or alum has an additional question, but I will follow up with both of you with a thank you email. And I just really appreciate your time today. Thank you both. And Conrhonda is an alum, so if someone is itching to get to know her, let me know and I'll put you in contact for sure.
You can hit me up on LinkedIn.
Yeah, for sure.
Just let me know that you're in the MAM program, and that's an instant accept.
Awesome.
Okay. Take care. Have a good weekend, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Bye.
Thank